Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Knitter podcast. I'm Tiffany, and on this podcast, I share any of my completed projects, my whips, and any acquisitions, as well as future plans. I have not filmed an update in quite a while because of one of the whips that I will show you. I am still, unfortunately, working on the melange sweater man for my husband, so in between that, I was able to finish 3 smaller projects that I am excited to share with you, but that has kind of been the behemoth and the focus of my attention. Hence why usually I kind of try to publish a podcast every 2 weeks, but I think this might have been 3 weeks in between. But anyways, let's get started with some positives first, which are my completed little projects. So this one I had shared in my last episode. It was still a whip at the time, but I did finish the little Musselburgh, is that how it's pronounced? Musselburgh beanie for my baby that is not born yet, still in my belly. If you missed last week's podcast, I am pregnant with a baby boy due in April of 2025. So we are beyond excited. This is our first baby, my first pregnancy. And of course, being a knitter, I wanted to knit a few things for the baby. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to dive into knitting garments. Maybe I'll knit a sweater because it's just so small. I feel like I could knit up a sweater in maybe a week or two because depending on what size I'm going to knit. But I'm hesitant to knit a lot of garments for the baby just because especially when they're so small, like they're mostly wearing onesies, they're mostly in the house, they're not going to be out and about like a person wearing real clothes, like I'm planning to kind of just have them wear onesies that are comfortable and stuff. And especially he'll be born in April, so then we'll be going into summer, which, I'm not putting him in wools in the summer anyways. So all of that being said, I'm not sure if I'm gonna quite dive into a lot of garment knitting for him, but I did want to knit him a little hat. And like I said, this is the Musselburgh beanie pattern, which I think a lot of you will be familiar with because it's one of the most, if not the most popular and most knitted hat, I think, on Ravelry or just in general. But in case you have never seen what it actually looks like before, the construction is very cool. You basically start at the top and you do increases. You do not have to gauge swatch, and the newest updated pattern, which I just purchased, still I didn't actually know that it didn't have this many options before, but I believe it goes all the way down. I have it right on my phone. It goes all the way down to a fingering weight yarn at 9 stitches per inch. So that's if it's like a 10 centimeter square, 4 times 9 is 36. So that's like a pretty light fingering weight, light sock weight yarn, all the way up to as thick as 5 stitches per inch, which would put you at like a DK weight, 20 stitches like gauge. And the obviously appealing part of this pattern is that it is swatchless, so you do not need to know your gauge ahead of time. You just kind of want to be in between those, because if you go any thinner, you're always going to have to make adjustments, as well as any thicker. But for the most part, I feel like that's a pretty standard range of stitches to knit a hat on anyways. So this yarn was right at the cusp. I think this was right at 9. So anything thinner than this probably wouldn't work as well. But that being said, this was like a fingering weight yarn that I got from Farmer's Daughter's Fiber as a giveaway prize. It's a sock yarn, and I think it's 70% merino wool, 20% nylon, something like that. I mentioned it in my last video during my whips, so I'm sorry if I don't have the label with me anymore. But it has this really beautiful kind of speckled blue look. I believe it's a hand-dyed yarn. And yeah, sorry, I got it kind of off track, but the construction of it, so you start at the top, you do increases. Once you get to about 1 inch of knitting, she has you measure your gauge because it's a 1-inch gauge. And then according to that and the size that you want to knit, you follow the pattern from there. You do increases to a certain amount, and then you do stockinette tube all the way down. And then you do decreases on the other end, which basically mirrors the top. So you get this kind of oval shape, and then you kind of have to finagle it a little bit, so this part can get a little tricky, but not really, because like I think the fabric lays really well and you can kind of just tuck it in on its self. So I kind of just go like this and kind of shake it about on my hand so that it kind of lays nice and flat. And you can either wear it just like this without a brim, or you can then fold up however much you want to create a more traditional beanie look with a brim, or you can, you know, again, fold it up even more to get like a really thick brim. It really is super customizable, which is what attracted me to this pattern. What also attracted me to this pattern is just like the way the fingering weight looks doubled up like this. I think it looks so beautiful. I usually am hesitant to knit anything in a lighter weight because it can feel endless. I knit a Cumulus tee earlier this year and was only able to finish it because that's the only project I brought with us to Switzerland. So I was like, had no choice but to knit that tee. But I did end up finishing it on that trip, and I love that yarn and the way it looks. So you'll actually see one of my whips is another Musselburgh hat using the spare yarn that I had from that. And I just love the way that the fingering yarn plus a small needle creates, like, it creates this really dense fabric, and it just looks really pretty. And then of course doubled up, it's nice and warm because it's mostly, you know, wool, depending on obviously the fabric you use, but if you're using like a sock yarn, it's probably some content of wool. And then the brim itself is even thicker because the brim is technically 4 layers of this fingering weight. And I have heard from a lot of people that the Musselburgh hat is extremely warm, and you know, they can wear it in like Canadian winters. You know, we live in New Jersey, so I think it'll be more than fine for New Jersey weather, and I just can't wait for him to wear this. It's so cute. I'm gonna talk about like some of the customization I made, even though this was my first hat, as I was knitting it. So even though this was my first Musselburgh hat that I was knitting, I still made a few adjustments. So looking at the measurements, this is the baby size, which also I'll talk about the sizing a little bit later because this would not fit a newborn. So I think when she says baby, she means like toddler, even though there's technically a toddler size as well. But I just have a hard time picturing, for sure this is too big for a newborn to wear. But for the baby size, it's meant to fit a head circumference of 40 centimeters, which is pretty big. That's 16 inches. Comparably, like my size would be an adult small, and that's 20 inches, but a newborn's head is gonna be a lot smaller than that. So if you're knitting this to think it's gonna fit your newborn, I would probably heavily moderate the pattern so that you have less stitches and that it's gonna be a thinner tube. But again, for me, because this was my first one, I didn't bother doing that. I just decided to knit it to the correct circumference. And the length is supposed to be 39.5 centimeters long from the unfolded length, so from tip to bottom, I guess. But for me, I knitted this so that it was 34 centimeters. So I shortened it by about 5.5 centimeters. And in case you're curious, because I think a lot of people knit this pattern, just the stockinette length in between is 21 centimeters. But I think that gave me a really more balanced looking beanie. And maybe this is personal preference. I don't like it when my beanie has a lot of length on top because I think it just gives you like, it makes you kind of look like a nipple when you have like a lot of length at the top. So I prefer my beanies to have like a shorter top, you know? So I think proportionately this probably has a shorter top than what she was envisioning, I guess. But that's one of the benefits of this pattern is you can easily adjust that, you know, depending on your personal preference, especially if you have knitted multiples of these and you kind of know what your sweet spot is. The only negative I'll say is because you have to knit the entire tube, there is some math involved, right? Like you want to make sure it's like, okay, how much do I need to save for the brim? And then how much do I want showing? Versus if you were to just do a traditional top-down DK hat, you could kind of like wear it as you go, and it's probably easier to modify the length in that way. So that's like the benefits and drawbacks, I think, of this construction. And then obviously once you start the decreases, you're kind of stuck with that length. So if you were to want to adjust it, you'd kind of have to like unpick all of that decrease section and then redo the stockinette. So I don't know, that's just like in case folks are wondering, I feel like I went into a lot of detail. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that I actually looked up before I started this hat of just tips and tricks of people who have knitted a ton of these hats, what their preferred yarn was, what their preferred gauge was, and how that affects the look of the hat and things like that. So I would recommend definitely looking to those videos because I think it helped me envision what type of yarn I wanted to go for with this hat, and helped me, you know, determine that I did want a fingering weight yarn just so that it would lay nice like this. Otherwise, because I knit the smallest size, I did have to knit this completely on using magic loop, or you could use DPNs just because the circumference wasn't quite 16 inch circular size. However, if you are knitting the adult small to adult extra large, eventually once you get to the stockinette portion, it's big enough to fit around 16-inch circulars, and you can knit it in the round versus having to do DPNs or magic loop. So that is also something to consider if you were doing the baby and toddler size. You will probably have to be doing that the whole time. For me, I don't really mind. I mean, magic loop is not my favorite, but I much prefer that to DPNs. So I did mine on magic loop. You can kind of tell my tension definitely still needs a little bit of work with magic loop. Like you can see just a little bit of like where the tension is a little bit different. There is this fold line actually because I blocked it this way, so that's not quite from just all my knitting, but that's me being really nitpicky. You know, if I'm really looking at it closely, I can see where my magic loop ends are. But I think overall, because it's gonna lay this way anyways, it doesn't matter. So anyways, that was like a very long-winded description, but I think this hat is so popular, so I did want to give it justice and really talk about it. And I am really proud of it because I really think it looks really good and professional. And yeah, and it was like quite easy to work up, again, because it wasn't super long. So even though it's all stockinette, I kind of prefer that because then I can do it on the train or when we're traveling or just watching TV. I'm definitely going to be knitting more Musselburghs. I already have in my plans, which I'll talk about some other variations of this hat that I'm going to be knitting up. Moving on to my next two completed objects, which are the same pattern, just in different size and different colors. And these are the Heuris gloves. I think it's Heuris gloves, fingerless gloves. I found this pattern on Ravelry just by looking up fingerless gloves, and I kind of wanted a pattern that was free. I was tempted to purchase the Petite Knit penny gloves, I think that's what they're called, which are pretty popular, but I ended up seeing this and they look very similar to that, and this is kind of the look that I wanted to go for anyways. So it worked out that it was a free pattern. I believe the pattern making it is Iris. She's on Instagram. I ended up following her on Instagram and tagging her when I completed these, and she reposted, and it was cool. But yeah, these are her fingerless gloves. And if this yarn looks familiar to you, this is the Double Sunday from Sandisgarn in, I think it's just called Scarlet Red. It's the same yarn that I knit up my Ingrid sweater in, and I had a decent amount left. So even after I have knit these two gloves, I think I still have one full ball of yarn left, like 50 grams left. So I don't know, maybe I'll make like myself a little Sophie scarf because I just love the Double Sunday yarn. It's so soft, it's so nice to knit with, and I love this red color for accessories. And yeah, so these are the gloves. This is the first pair that I knit, so there's just a little bit of discrepancy, and I don't know how because I counted all the rows pretty much. So she has you basically cast on from the bottom, and she suggests two different types of cast on. I tried the first one, could not figure it out, and then the second one is a 1x1 Italian cast on, but the tutorial she gave you makes it so that it's it makes it so that when you join in the round, it's a lot easier, and it creates this kind of like rolled cuff effect that I quite like. I mean, some people might find it annoying and want it to be like flat like this, but I kind of like the way it looks. It almost looks like it has like a little border. And then you do stockinette for the wrists, then you do increases here, and then you basically put stitches on hold for the thumb, continue in stockinette, do one row of 1 by 1 rib, bind off, and then same with the thumb, then you pick up, do stockinette, 1 by 1 rib, bind off. So the only interesting thing is that like the bottom technically doesn't have this 1 by 1 rib. I mean, it kind of does, because when you do the Italian bind on, like cast on, it's kind of meant for 1 by 1 rib, but I don't know why it doesn't look the same. I don't know. I'm not quite like knowledgeable in that area. But for some reason, I think this pair has a longer finger length than this one. Like, do you see how different they are? And I could have sworn I counted the same rows, but it's definitely not. Like, if you look at it, I'm like, that's definitely not the same rows, even though I thought I did. So that's on me. She does give you measurement guides throughout the pattern, but for me, even though I'm a very even knitter, I like to count my rows anyways. So for example, if a pattern says knit to 10 centimeters, which is what this does, I like to still count how many rows is 10 centimeters, just so that way, on the other hand, I can just knit to that row length and not have to be constantly measuring. And usually I'll measure for, just to double check. And then I guess I just didn't do that with the tops, because pretty sure I did this longer one first, thought I counted the right amount of rows. So then when I did this one, I clearly didn't. So I either knit less rows or maybe counted wrong, or something went wrong. It's not like enough to bother me so that I never wear them, but it is kind of funny because I feel like this is like so much shorter when you look at them side by side like this. So it's kind of funny. If you follow me on Instagram, I did post about this, and I didn't mention that in those photos, and the way the photos look, they look even, but I knew I was going to talk about it in the podcast. But yeah, so that would be my suggestion, is make sure you count the correct number of rows so that when you are knitting your second pair, they're even, and you won't make a mistake like me. I still really like them. And again, this was kind of my first foray into fingerless gloves, period. So I do think they still came out great, considering this is the first time I knit a fingerless glove pattern. It's pretty easy to knit up. I would say this is a good beginner pattern, but the only thing I will say is only if you are willing to dive into DPNs or magic loop as a beginner, which for me, when I first started knitting, I knit the Monday sweater. That was kind of like my first ever garment piece, and I did have to do magic loop with the sleeves, and that was a little confusing at the beginning, but once you do it a few times, I feel like magic loop to me makes more sense than DPNs, because I just hate how all the needles, it's too many needles. I like magic loop because it's just on one thing, and to me now, as a more experienced knitter, it makes sense when I have to do magic loop. So if you are a beginner, familiar with magic loop, like if you've done more sock knitting and stuff, then I think this will be a really easy switch, from sock knitting, because it's a very similar construction to a sock, like in the same way, where it's like small circumference and stockinette stitch. But yeah, I think they still came out really cute. And again, I love this bright red color. I think it just adds a pop to my outfits, even though they are technically uneven. Next, I want to share the second pair of gloves that I knit up. So this is the exact same pattern, just in a different yarn. And this also is a size up. So these are the smallest size, which fit me pretty well. Like, they fit me tight, which is what I wanted. So that also depends. Like, she does give measurement guides. So these, you can see they're like really tight on my hand, but that's kind of the look I like to go for. So depending on that, I would just, choose your size based on comfort. These I knit for my mother-in-law. I absolutely love the color of this yarn. This is the Barocco, hold on, I have the name because I did a whole yarn stash clean out the other day and put all my yarns in a tracker. This is the Barocco Ultra Wool DK in the shade Forget Me Not, which is 83162. Look how organized I am. I have it all in a spreadsheet. It's a 100% superwash wool DK weight. These come in 100-gram balls or skeins, I guess, and in each comes with 267 meters. The gauge is 23 by 30 on a 4mm needle. But what's kind of interesting is I sometimes find the way that yarns, like what they say their gauge is is interesting because I prefer a much tighter weave, I guess, like a knit fabric like this. Whereas I don't know if you can tell, but this is like much more porous. And these are both considered DK weight yarns. I know, it's slightly different because they're different types of yarns or different types of wool, but I'm pretty sure I knitted these in a 3.5, but I did knit these in a 4, and they feel airier. I mean, they are kind of like the way I'm not describing this very well, but I just feel like there's more air in here, and maybe that's just a quality of the wool. But I do also think it's because I knit them with 4mm needles. So I don't know. Either way, I did make sure to really count my rows correctly because I knew these were going to be a gift. And so these are even. I made sure to try them on and make sure they are even. They're folded a little weird because I had them folded to wrap as a gift because, like I said, these are for my mother-in-law. But yeah, I absolutely love the way this yarn feels. It's also very soft. I think Barocco yarn is a pretty well-known yarn in the knitting community. Alex actually got me 3 balls of it for Christmas last year when I was still only doing crochet. And so I kind of just kept those 3 balls of yarn being like, well, it's hard to crochet something out of this. And then once I started getting into knitting, I was like, ooh, these yarns are super nice. I want to figure out what I can knit with these yarns. So this is kind of the first project that I use those yarns for. Another note that I'll make about the pattern is that when you pick up for the thumb, you can kind of get quite a big hole. Like I kind of tried to sew them up as much as I could with the yarn. So the way they have it is like you break off, or you just put these stitches on hold and then you knit the hand part. And so for the thumb part, once you pick them back up, she does have you pick up 2 extra stitches. But instead of doing that, I just picked up however many were here, increased, and then kept knitting stockinette, and then I left enough yarn where I picked up to be able to sew that together at the ends before I weave in my ends, if that makes sense. And I also knit this in a size larger than me, even though I don't think my mother-in-law has like quite bigger hands. I mean, she definitely has bigger hands than me, but not by a ton. But I did want to give some room and not make these so tight in case she didn't like that feel. So I think these will fit her pretty well. And I think I made the finger part just a little longer as well. Like they kind of almost cover your pinky, but I actually think that is nice because it actually provides more warmth. So they don't look quite like the traditional finger gloves where they're supposed to end kind of at the knuckles like this. But I just, she does have a bigger hand, so maybe on her it'll probably fit maybe closer to like this. But I just think that actually covers more of your hand, so it's warm, but your fingers are still available to, use your phone and stuff like that. So again, I like that this pattern is very customizable. So according to your exact hand length or your preference of where the cutoff is, you can kind of tailor the pattern however you want. And I'm sure these are not going to be the last 2 gloves I knit. I can knit both of these up in one day, which is great. So these are a great quick project if you were going on like a day trip somewhere, or if you're going on a plane ride, this would be a great project to cast on, and you can cast off, right then and there. And yeah, so I'm excited to give these to her for Christmas. Alrighty, now that we have talked about all my completed projects, let's get into my whips. It's like whips. I have so many whips going on, which is not unusual for me. But I was really hoping this first one would not be a whip by now. So like I said in my last video, I am currently knitting my husband the Melange sweater by Petite Knit. It is the Melange sweater man pattern. She also has a women's version and I think a junior version as well. Looks like this. I absolutely love the look of it. It really looks very professional. It looks complicated, even though the way you get the melange is just holding 2 contrasting strands of tin Peer Gynt together. And that creates this really cool melange effect. But I think to someone who is not a knitter looking at this, it might look super complex and is like, whoa, how did you get all those colors? And it looks very impressive, I will admit. So, this pattern. Last time I showed this, I think I was finished with the body, maybe not even. And in the last 2.5 weeks, I was able to finish the body, finish the sleeves, wash and block it. And of course, it was too short for my husband. He is 5'11". I'm knitting him the size large. I did shorten the body, and I think I just fell into the trap of like, I just want to finish this stupid sweater and get to the sleeves. And so I rushed through the body. I didn't have him try it on because I was just using one of his other sweaters as reference, but I must have just been measuring things wrong. And I should have just knit to the pattern that she said, because the length that she says to knit nets you like, I think a 74 centimeter body. And for some reason, some of his other sweaters just were measuring a lot shorter than that. So I convinced myself that I needed to shorten the pattern, which is just ridiculous because I did not, and I should not have. And that obviously put me back quite a bit. So what I did was like I said, I finished the body, I finished the sleeves. The sleeves I did knit exactly to length. And I should have just known then that I had made a mistake, because then when he tried on the sweater with the sleeves fit perfectly. So I should have known to be like, ooh, like the body's probably going to be too short if I knit the sleeves correctly, but they fit, you know? So, but I think I was just in denial and just really didn't want to keep knitting on this sweater, because even though it's all stockinette, which is great, it's good for mindless knitting, you know, sitting in front of the TV and stuff, this is the biggest piece I have ever made. And I was just so sick of knitting this sweater that I just really wanted to get it done, and my impatience got the better of me. And I have learned my lesson the hard way, okay? So like I said, I rinsed it, I spun it in the dryer, laid it out flat. I had him try it on this morning, and of course it was too short. I'll put like a photo here. It's annoying because like in the photo pre-blocked, it didn't look that short. So I just, in my head, thought that, you know, blocking it out, it would grow a lot more than it actually did. And I probably also should have known that, because this is Pure Gint, which is a pretty toothy, rusticy kind of wool. So it's not known for growing that much, you know? So I should have, again, just known that and not relied on the blocking process to stretch it out. All that being said, I frogged the entire bottom ribbing, which is like 10 centimeters of ribbing. And I tried to use this method of like doing a safety thing. So I put the needle through all the loops I thought correctly, but then as I was frogging, something went wrong and it was like not right. So I was like, oh my God. So I had to take out the needle, and the only saving grace is that because this Pure Gint is so toothy, the loops actually really stayed intact. And so I was able to pick up the row basically above and fix it, and it was fine. But you know, because I had to unpick all of that ribbing plus maybe 3 centimeters of the stockinette, you know, that really set me back a decent amount. So now, you know, it just looks like a little crop top. But anyways, that's like all my woes about this sweater. I'm still very excited to finish it because I think it looks absolutely beautiful, and it really looks good on him, you know, all else aside. Like everything else fits perfectly. So that is like my one motivation to get this done, ideally before Christmas, is just because I think it really looks good on him. And it's just, I was impatient and knitted it too short. But like I said, I have learned my lesson the hard way, and I'm not going to do that ever again. I don't know if I'll knit him a sweater ever again either, because it's just like insane. But anyways, I did want to share it and talk about it. Again, I will talk about like all the specific construction stuff, all of that, and share pictures when I actually finish it. And yeah, I'll just mention here too, this is kind of like me just like being anal or being weird, but because the body is literally 236 stitches, it takes a long time just to knit one round, and it's about 3 rows per centimeter. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna measure out how many centimeters I actually need to knit this to start the ribbing, and calculate basically how much time it took me to knit one round, and use that as a motivator of like, okay, this is how many hours of knitting I have left to get to the ribbing. So I did that calculation today. It takes me about 9.5 minutes to knit one full round. I'm an English knitter. I think I'm like a moderately fast knitter. I'm definitely not the fastest that I've seen like in my knitting group, but I am a pretty quick knitter. Like I wouldn't call myself a slow knitter whatsoever. I think because the fabric is so big, it's like it pulls on my needle weirdly. So it's I have to keep adjusting, you know, as I'm knitting. So that does take away some of my knitting time. But I also made sure to knit one round, like 2 rounds, and take the average time, which is basically right about 9.5 minutes. So I rounded up to 10 minutes a round at 3 rounds per centimeter. So that would be 30 minutes per centimeter. And basically with however many centimeters I needed to do more, I have about 3.5 hours of knitting until I get to the ribbing. And of course, this is like uninterrupted knitting, which almost never happens. So anyways, I just wanted to do the math because I don't know, in my head, I'm like, okay, 3.5 hours, that's not too bad. You know, you could technically bang that out in an afternoon. We also have Christmas break coming up. So there's a lot of family time where we're just hanging out, watching TV, watching football, watching movies. There's actually a lot of like that 3.5 hours will go by very quickly. I also go to a knitting group every Thursday, and today is Thursday. So I'm planning on going, and that'll give me a good concentrated hour probably of knitting time. So I was like really optimistic that I was going to finish this before Christmas. Today's the 19th. I do still think I can finish this before Christmas Eve because that's when we are going to do presents and stuff with his side of the family. And although he's obviously seen this sweater and tried it on, I was going to wrap it and have him open it up in front of his family just because that would be fun. So the goal is still to finish this by Christmas Eve. That gives me 5 days. I think I can do it, especially if sorry, my phone just fell. Especially if I only knit on this, I'm confident that I can do it. It's just like the never-ending project. Moving on to my second Musselburgh hat, Musselburgh. I keep saying Musselburgh hat that is on my needles currently. I actually cast this on a while ago, and this I like to just think of as my train or transit knitting project. So I brought this to work with me 2 weeks ago, but I accidentally left it there. So then I didn't have it when I commuted in yesterday, or else I probably would have gotten even more done. But this is the Musselburgh hat that I am knitting for myself. It's kind of a very similar blue, you know, it's like somewhat more cool tone, but it is a blue. I'm gonna match my son. I think it'll be cute. But like I said, I had a lot of this yarn left over from the Cumulus tee. This is the Mayflower Easy Care Merino wool in the color, I think it's called Chinois Green, but it's the color 58, number 58. It's this beautiful, kind of like muted, almost, it's like a muted teal. It's like if this were more saturated, it would be a teal color, but it is quite like that blue-green, leaning a little more blue. And it's a very airy yarn. I'll put a photo of what my Cumulus tee looks like. It's also on my Instagram feed if you've followed me for a while. So that's kind of what it looks like in a garment. The gauge is 28 by 40 on 3 to 3.5 millimeter needles. I'm knitting this up on 3 millimeter needles because, like I said, I wanted to create this like denser fabric, and I think that I've achieved that with the 3 millimeter needles. So this is about where I am now. This is basically, I'm almost, I would say, at the midpoint, because like I said, I like a shorter beanie. So if I were to fold it up, like as if there was like a brim, I feel like I'm basically at the halfway point. So that's kind of encouraging. And I'm just going to keep measuring as I go, like I did with the baby hat, and just see what makes sense. And I have a beanie that I have in my collection that is like store-bought that I really like to wear because I think it fits perfectly on my head. So I've kind of just going with that measurement with this, give or take, you know, a few centimeters and stuff. But yeah, this is just kind of what it looks like. You know, I won't talk about the pattern because it's obviously the exact same pattern. Just kind of a slightly different look with this yarn because it's so airy and fluffy, but I do still really like the way it's shaping up. And I do think it's going to be really warm because it's 100% wool. So, you know, doubled up and then quadrupled up at the ears, I think will actually give me a really warm beanie. This I'm in no rush to finish. This, like I said, is kind of like my side project where it's just good if I know we're going to be in commute or going to like an event. So it's something I can like squish in my bag. So I'm not like super motivated to finish this, but again, it's just like a nice on-the-go project that I am knitting. Next up is another item that I am actually knitting for my husband, and that is the Harris hood. I think that's what it's called. And I need to be careful here because the way it's sitting on my needles is making me a little nervous, but it is a hood that eventually you can kind of start to see the shape here. This is like what it looks like. And then eventually you join in the round for the neck, and then you add like a ribbed border, and it's meant to be just like a detached hood that you can wear, you know, over your head. But it's nice because of it's a hood, it's not gonna like weigh down your hair as much. And I will put a picture of what it looks like here so you have a better idea of what the pattern looks like. But yeah, I think maybe I was watching a podcast where someone suggested this as like a gift knit or like a holiday gift knit, and I just thought the pattern looked really cool, and I was actually going to knit one for myself, but then I showed it to my husband and he was like, oh, like I would wear something like that. So I was like, all right, well then you get the first one, the prototype, I suppose. This is a really beautiful yarn by Knit Picks. It's the Knit Picks Hawthorne sock yarn, and I'm holding it double. This hood I think is knitted in a pretty big gauge. It's like 16 stitches on 5.5 millimeter needles. What is this? 5 millimeter? I think it might be 5.5 millimeter needles in the pattern, but I'm using 5 millimeter needles. I did not gauge swatch. I wasn't too concerned because it's a hood. So I was like, okay, if it's too small, I'll wear it. But if it's bigger, then Alex can wear it. Like it's not, to me, the size doesn't have to be quite as accurate as if you were knitting a garment. So I just didn't bother to gauge swatch. But this is the Hawthorne sock yarn, which is about, let's see. I have another skein here. It is, I hate how Knit Picks does this. They don't do it by the 10 centimeter square number. They do it by like per inch. So it's 7 to 8 stitches per inch. So in a 4-inch square, that's like 4, 7, 28 to 32 stitches. So that's like a pretty traditional sock yarn gauge, I think. I do really like the way this yarn looks. It's like, let me see if it's gonna show well on camera. It's like very tightly wound, and it creates almost this like corded look, if that makes sense, compared to, you know, something like this where this looks more just like a traditional yarn. Like, I don't know if that makes sense. This just feels like it's more 3D. And I think that really shows in the way it knits up. It just looks like it has a lot of dimension, which I really like, and I've never knitted with a yarn that looks like this. So yeah, it's been a real joy to work with. It's fun to work on 5 millimeter needles because usually I work, you know, on 3.5 to 4 millimeter needles. So this is my first project, I think ever, that I've done in a needle this large. So it really is working up quickly, which I like. And yeah, the construction so far has been relatively easy, nothing crazy. I feel like the instructions were really clear. I'm really excited to finish this. I think I'll probably also finish this before Christmas. Depends on how quickly I can finish the sweater, because this is kind of like my other active item that I'm knitting on. It would also be nice to like have something done for him so I can also wrap this and have him open it in front of his family. But yeah, so I've been really enjoying this, and I'll definitely talk about it more once it's actually completed. Moving on to my last whip. I know it seems kind of crazy that I have so many whips, but I saw this pattern also in someone's podcast that they had talked about like holiday or gift knits, and this was a free pattern, so I thought, okay, low stakes, you know, I'll try it out. And I've been wanting to knit myself a headband for a while, so this is the beginnings of the Scarlet headband. You can look that up on Ravelry. Like I said, it's a free pattern. It's very simple. You literally knit a stockinette tube, and then she gives instructions for how to sew it together, so it creates kind of a bow at the front. And of course you can wear it with the bow in front or bow in back. You could also just knit a tube like this and stitch it together and just have it be like a very traditional headband. But I had enough of this leftover Sandisgarn Merino yarn. This is actually the first wool yarn I ever purchased, and this was for my Monday sweater. And I bought so much extra yarn because I was just like so worried that I would run out of yarn. So I actually have a decent amount of this left, enough so that after the Monday sweater, I knitted a bandana for my friend Charlene, and I still have like 100 grams of this left, or maybe, yeah, like 75 to 100 grams of this left, which is more than enough to knit this headband up in. And yeah, I'm knitting it on 3.5 millimeter needles, which I think is the recommended. I think for the Merino, it's like 3.5 to 4 millimeter needles. It's a DK weight yarn. It's really soft. I really like this yarn. You know, my whole Monday sweater is like lays beautifully, even though it was like the first sweater I ever made, and I attribute that a lot to this yarn. So it's creating this really nice, dense fabric that I like, because that Monday sweater is actually knitted in 4 millimeter needles, so it's like slightly airier, but I really like this dense feel, and I think this this will definitely be a warm headband. It's very customizable. I even made it smaller because it's basically just a tube, so however thick you want it is how many you cast on, kind of. So you could gauge swatch. I didn't bother, you know, because I just figured like I could figure it out, and this is about as thick as I would want a headband, so I feel like I estimated that pretty well. And honestly, the only reason I cast this on was because I had to commute in for work yesterday, and I left my Musselburgh hat project at work, so I have a 2-hour train ride to commute in. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but yeah, it's from door to door. It's 2 hours long, so there's a good hour that I have on one train to knit, and then usually then I'm commuting, and I don't really knit on the second train that I'm on because that's only for like 20 minutes. So because of that, I usually just listen to a podcast, but I do like to have something that I can knit on just if I feel like it. So I decided to just cast this on in the morning, and then I ended up working up this much, I guess, in the hour I was on the train, which is not bad. So it's a nice, again, little small project. Also not in a rush to finish. Like I said, the melange sweater is at the top of my list to finish, then the hood, then probably my beanie, and then it's this. This is really just, again, something else texture-wise to give my hands to work on. I feel like a lot of knitters have that feeling where it's like sometimes you just get bored of a project, so you just want a different texture, different feel, different needle size, give your hands a break. And yeah, so I don't know when I'll finish this, but I do like it so far. It's literally just a stockinette tube. Lastly, I wanted to show you 2 more of the Hawthorne colorway yarns that I purchased in my yarn acquisitions portion. I actually purchased 3 skeins of these with the intention of doing Musselburgh hats with all 3, but like you just saw with my Harris hood, I decided to repurpose that skein for a Harris hood, and I should still have enough, even holding it double, to then maybe knit a baby beanie again. Like I'll have to see exactly how much and calculate how much yardage I have left, but I think even held double, I'll have enough, like I said, to then do a Musselburgh beanie held single. We'll see. And then so that brown colorway, I will tell you the exact color, was in Deer Island Tonal. This is the Knit Picks Hawthorne sock yarn. Deer Island Tonal. It's an 80% superwash wool, 20% polyamide fingering weight yarn, and I already told you the gauge earlier. And then the 2 other colorways is the exact same content of yarn, just different colors. So this one is the Silverton Tonal. It's this really cool, I guess, is this variegated? I'm not quite sure what this is called. I think it's hand dyed though. Are these hand dyed? Maybe not, I'm not quite sure, but it kind of looks like a hand-dyed yarn, but it's this nice purpley gray color. And my mom really likes this color, so I also showed her the Harris hood to see if she was interested, because I was gonna knit her a beanie, which she requested, but I also showed her the hood, and I was like, the hood might be nice because it doesn't like, you know, sit on your head, so you can still have your hair up and like have a hood. Like, would you be interested in that? She was like, yeah, I would. So I think I'll have her try on Alex's once I finish it to see if she likes the look. If she does, I'll knit her a Harris hood. And it's a one size fits all hood, so there's no, there's no sizing. So I'll knit her one in this color, but if she doesn't like the look of that, then I will knit her a Musselburgh with this held single, which I think will look nice. And then I also got the colorway Confetti Speckle. I've been wanting to purchase a yarn like this for a while. So I just think it looks really cute. It's like a really nice white base with this kind of like says confetti speckling throughout. Like I said, I was gonna knit a Musselburgh hat with this, but I am knitting a gift for my friend Daphne, and I let her pick between a Sophie scarf, the fingerless gloves, or the headband, like the scarlet headband, because I wanted something that like wasn't going to take too much time, to be honest, but like that I could just knit as like a little Christmas gift for her. And she really liked the look of the Sophie scarf, which I kind of knew she would. So I'm going to, and she likes the colorway of this yarn as well. So I'm going to knit her a Sophie scarf with this held double, which I think is fine because the Sophie scarf is like a garter stitch, and I think it's like meant for a DK weight. So if I hold this double, I think that'll look good. And I'm not even gonna bother the gauge swatch because it's a scarf. So I think it'll look fine. I can always adjust the length if I need to as I'm going. I'm familiar enough with that pattern that I feel comfortable like moderating it if I need to as I go. But yeah, I think it'll look really cute with this held double. So I'll definitely have enough left over for maybe I'll knit myself a matching scarf, or maybe I'll knit a pair of gloves. I don't know. I think there's like a lot of options. And because it's a super wash wool, it's really soft. So I have been really liking this yarn, and I think it's like a fan favorite for a reason. So yeah, I've been enjoying this so far. All right, so this podcast ended up being like a long one. I think I'm just more long-winded and scatterbrained now that I'm pregnant. So sorry for that if this is not your cup of tea, but I did want to quickly touch on future plans. I kind of, it kind of ties into like the yarn because I like to only buy yarn if I know what project I'm going to be doing. So I don't have a ton of like yarn just lying around. And like I mentioned earlier, I did just do a whole yarn cleanse. Maybe I'll do like a yarn tour at some point, but I don't have a ton in my collection. I feel like it wouldn't be interesting, but let me know if you're interested. And also let me know if you're interested in me sharing my template of my yarn. Like it's literally, I call it my yarn tracker, but I list all the yarns, all their attributes and projects that I want to do with them or that I have done with them. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that. I don't know, I'm just kind of like an Excel geek sometimes. But the only item that I have not mentioned that I'm thinking about knitting next is I did purchase some yarn from Knitting for Olive. It's taking forever to get shipped here because I guess they're shipping it from Sweden, Denmark, wherever they're based. I don't know. It's like one of those countries. So I think it's not going to get to me until closer to Christmas. But my plan was to actually start on a summer knit because I wanted to have it completed by the time the summer comes around. And so to do that, you obviously need to pre-plan and start knitting, later in the winter so that you have it ready to go for like through spring. So the plan for that is oh my goodness, let me look up my patterns, is the tank top by Petite Knit. I will find exactly what it is. The Audrey top. So again, I'll put a picture of what it looks like. I have been attracted to this pattern for a while. So I've actually purchased it a while ago, but just never purchased the yarn to cast it on. And I don't know, I just think it looks really elegant, really cute. I probably wouldn't wear it just like that. I probably would wear like a little cardigan over the top or something, but I just kind of wanted to knit a summer knit that was a tank top because it was less intimidating. You kind of just knit the body and you don't have to deal with sleeves. So this pattern was attractive to me. And she suggests one of her suggestions is, I think, Knitting for Olive, but I could be wrong. But anyway, so I'm using a Knitting for Olive yarn in a similar black color I think I purchased for this. So that's one of my future plans to cast on probably pretty soon. And then the other one that I also purchased was the, let's see, what's the sweater name called? The Celeste sweater, which is the Colorwork sweater by Petite Knit. Again, I'll put it here so you can see what it looks like. She uses Pure Gint though, and I do not love Pure Gint. It's fun to knit with because it's rustic and it feels cool, but it's a little scratchy. So I will probably knit it with Double Sunday instead, which I think a lot of people online have knitted it with. And I love the texture of the Double Sunday, and it has a very similar gauge. So I will probably cast that on. I'm just not quite sure if I want to cast it on now because we're already at Christmas. And by the time I finish it will be probably well into like February and March. And like, would I be wearing a 100% wool sweater by then? I don't know. Like, New Jersey's still pretty cold in February and March, so I feel like I would still be able to get some wear out of it, but I might just hold off and save it for like late summer and fall knitting next year so that I can wear it through the fall and through the winter next year. So most likely that's what's gonna happen, but technically that is something that I've thought about casting on, and I like that it's like a little bit of color work to dip my toe into, but the body and the most of the sleeves are all stockinette in one color. So yeah, and like I said, I go to a knitting group every Thursday, and the people who own the shop like knit with us, and they're very experienced knitters, so I feel comfortable, you know, asking them if I have any questions about the color work, and maybe that's just something I work on Thursdays. But like I said, I might wait to knit this next year just because I really want to be able to enjoy it. But those are the two patterns that I have on my wish list. Otherwise, all the other ones I had on my wish list I've cast on, so there you go. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this extra long episode. I'll probably upload this Christmas Eve, so I hope you have a great Christmas Eve if you celebrate, and great Christmas Day. If not, then I hope you're having a good holiday break, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.